Well, that's Imran Khan for you. Conspiracies, religion and goof-ups. Perhaps he needs a lesson from West Asia. For decades, it was the powder keg of world politics. Rivalries, oil wars, religion. It was all about high-octane emotional politics. Well, not anymore. Now West Asia is turning to realism. And this picture is proof. Those are 6 foreign ministers, 1 from the United States, 1 from Israel and 4 from the Arab world. Where did they meet? At a resort deep in Israel's Negev desert. It was almost like a college reunion. A lot of hand-holding, a lot of smiling makes you forget the political history. Until 2 years ago, these countries were rivals. The Arab world did not recognize Israel's existence, but today 4 of their ministers attended the summit. The foreign ministers of Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco and Egypt. They're calling it the Abraham Accords Summit. Egypt is not part of the Accords, yet their foreign minister was invited. What was on the agenda? Broadly speaking, 3 things. 1, the Iran nuclear deal. 2, the strengthening of the Abraham Accords and possibly bringing in more Arab countries. And number 3, the war in Ukraine. The optics were excellent. What about the substance? Each country came with its own agenda. America wants to repair its West Asian alliance. Israel wanted insurance against Iran, and the Arab states wanted more trade and investment. Let's discuss them one by one. So far, West Asia has been neutral on Ukraine. No harsh criticism, no sanctions. They value Russia's importance in OPEC+, the oil cartel. Joe Biden wants to change that. He wants West Asia, especially Israel, to be more vocal. He wants them to join the Western camp. The question is, what can he offer in return? And we know what Israel wants, a tougher position on Iran. Israel sees the Abraham Accords as a bulwark against Tehran.
This new architecture, the shared capabilities we are building, intimidates and deters our common enemies, first and foremost, Iran and its proxies.
You can understand the fear. Iran is very close to signing the nuclear deal. If they do so, some sanctions will be rolled back, which means Iran will be able to sell its oil again. They can welcome foreign investors. They can resume international trade. Basically, a big boost to Iran's economy. So naturally, Israel is worried. For them, a powerful Iran is an existential threat. Antony Blinken did try to allay some of these fears. He promised to never let Iran acquire a nuclear weapon. But listen closely to the analogy he used.
We are both committed, both determined that Iran will never acquire a nuclear weapon. Russia's aggression against Ukraine is another reminder of why this is so important. An Iran with a nuclear weapon or the capacity to produce one on short notice would become even more aggressive and would believe it could act with a false sense of impunity.
The intent is there, but what are both sides willing to sacrifice? One major contention is the Iran Revolutionary Guards. Right now, they're sanctioned by the US, but if the nuclear deal is signed, that could change. The sanctions could be lifted, and Israel is desperately trying to prevent that. Well, so is the Arab world. They too are wary of a resurgent Iran. But unlike Israel, they have multiple options. Last week, the UAE had a special guest, Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. Why was this visit important? Because of 2 reasons. A, it was Assad's first visit to the UAE since the war began 11 years ago. And B, Assad is a key ally of Iran. Join the dots. So Arab states are going it alone. They have ended the blockade on Qatar. They're mending ties with Turkey. They're bringing Syria back into the fold. What does all of this mean? A more independent West Asian foreign policy. For decades, the US was the biggest power in the region. For security, for investments, Gulf states always depended on the United States. But in the last few years, that has changed. America is not open to using its hard power anymore. We saw that in Afghanistan. We are seeing that again in Ukraine. So West Asia is looking for other options. Having said that, this will not happen overnight. The US is still the driving force behind the Abraham Accords, also the biggest arms dealer in West Asia. But what about the long term? What if West Asia moves away from the US security umbrella? Well, that's the big worry for Washington, D.C. But their problems pale in comparison to Palestine's. Their Arab allies are deserting them. Their internal politics is fractured. Palestine is once again on the back burner. Antony Blinken did visit Ramallah on Sunday, but the atmosphere was tense. The Palestinian president publicly called out Western double standards on Israel. Listen to what he said.
The current events in Europe have shown blatant double standards despite the crimes of the Israeli occupation that amounted to ethnic cleansing and racial discrimination, as recognized by human rights organizations.
The Abraham Accords were supposed to dehyphenate Palestine, not bury the Palestinian cause. Right now, that's where things are headed. A more inward-looking West Asia, fearful of a resurgent Iran. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.